Welcome to the Ghost Story Grandma channel. Today, Grandma will bring you a mysterious and eerie tale. Get ready for it. Ghost Story. Disturbing, true deep woods, wilderness horror stories. As the sun began to set, dim light filtered through the dense canopy, casting long streaks on the damp ground. Lucas hoisted his backpack onto his shoulders and looked ahead at the trail. They had been trekking deep into the forest all afternoon, climbing over rocky slopes and passing ancient tree roots covered in moss. Their campsite was only a short distance away, tucked in a remote area rarely visited by others. Marcus walked beside him, squinting at their surroundings. Does anyone else think this place feels strange? Emily, trailing behind and exhausted from the long journey, asked, "What do you mean?" Marcus shrugged. "It's just too quiet. No birds, no insects, only the sound of our footsteps." Danielle stopped and listened. Indeed, the silence was unnatural. No chirping cicadas, no rustling leaves from the wind. Only the sound of their breathing and the crunch of gravel underfoot. Lucas broke the tense atmosphere. "Maybe we've gone too far. Fewer people come here, so the wildlife stays away too." They kept walking. When they arrived, Lucas dropped his backpack and stretched his legs. Here we are, a night in the wild. Emily sat on a nearby log and took a sip from her water bottle. "Just make sure we don't camp too close to the river or under a big tree. It might get cold tonight." Danielle wandered around, her eyes scanning the towering trees. She stopped when she spotted an ancient tree with strange markings carved into its bark. Some of the symbols had faded with time, but their shapes were still recognizable. She reached out and ran her fingers over the rough surface. A faint breeze passed through, carrying the damp, earthy scent of the forest. "Look at this," she called out. "Does anyone know what these symbols mean?" Lucas stepped closer, squinting. "Probably just hunting or trail markers, nothing to worry about." Marcus shook his head. "I'm not so sure. Looks more like some kind of old ritual markings." Nightfall came quickly. They built a fire, gathered around, ate their dinner, and chatted. As the darkness fully settled, the forest was swallowed by shadows. The flickering flames cast dancing silhouettes on the trees. Near midnight, just as they were about to sleep, a sound echoed from the distance, soft footsteps on dry leaves. Not fast, not slow, but steady. Emily sat up instantly. "Did you hear that?" Lucas gripped his flashlight and swept its beam toward the direction of the noise. Nothing but silent trees. Yet, the footsteps continued, circling the camp. Marcus stood, lowering his voice. "It's probably just a deer or something." Danielle remained silent, a chill creeping down her spine. The sound wasn't like an animal. It had a steady, deliberate rhythm, as if someone was watching them from the darkness. The wind stirred the leaves gently. But the footsteps had stopped. A cold wind whispered through the trees, carrying the damp scent of the earth. The campfire still burned, its flickering light casting uneasy shadows on their tense faces. No one spoke. They were all listening. Lucas swept his flashlight across the darkness. The dense trees allowed only a small patch of light before the shadows swallowed it whole. Nothing moved. Marcus scanned the area, stepping cautiously toward the edge of the camp, his eyes locked on the void beyond. A gust of wind rustled the dry leaves. This time it wasn't footsteps. Danielle stood frozen, her gaze fixed on a single point. Lucas noticed. She wasn't speaking, just staring in one direction, her fingers clutching the sleeve of her jacket. He turned his flashlight toward it. Nothing but rough tree bark and a pile of decaying leaves. Yet, her expression didn't change. Emily tugged at Danielle's arm, her voice quieter than usual. No one in the group wanted to make a loud sound right now. She whispered something, but Danielle didn't respond immediately. After a pause, she murmured just loud enough to be heard. Something just moved there. Lucas tightened his grip on the flashlight and took a step forward. He scanned the area again, slower this time. The darkness consumed everything beyond a few meters. Nothing. But the unease in the air lingered. Marcus turned back, trying to sound composed. "Could be an animal, a bear, a deer, maybe a fox. They come out at night." But even as he said it, he didn't sound convinced. No one slept right away. They tried to ignore the unsettling feeling, but someone was always tending the fire, keeping watch. After a while, when the night had fully settled in, the footsteps returned. That same slow, deliberate rhythm. Lucas sat up instantly, gripping his flashlight. This time, it wasn't just one sound. There were multiple, some light, some heavy, as if more than one person was moving, but no one spoke. Emily pulled her jacket tighter, shrinking into herself. Marcus reached into his backpack, drawing out a knife, his eyes locked onto the darkness. Lucas switched on his flashlight, but this time he didn't sweep it back and forth. He held it steady, aimed straight ahead. A pair of eyes reflected the light from the darkness. The group froze. The eyes didn't blink. They just stared, about 15 meters away. No breath, no sound, just the wind. Then another pair appeared, and another. They stood motionless. No one dared to move. No one spoke. The wind picked up, making the fire flare for a moment before dimming. In that brief flicker, a whisper drifted from the distance, soft, unintelligible. Then, silence. The eyes vanished. Only the crackling fire and the wind howling through the trees remained. No one slept that night. Morning came slowly. No one spoke about what had happened, but they all knew the night had been anything but normal. At some point, the fire had burned out, leaving scattered ashes on the ground. Danielle was the first to step out of the tent. She walked past the mixed footprints in the dirt, some belonging to the group, others not. The sizes were uneven, the directions chaotic. Lucas studied them for a moment before glancing toward the forest. The sky was overcast, and mist clung to the leaves. The air smelled damp, tinged with something earthy and strange. Marcus moved around the camp, checking their backpacks and gear. Everything was intact, untouched, but the unease remained. Emily busied herself packing, her eyes darting occasionally toward the trees. She didn't say it aloud, but it was clear she had no intention of spending another night here. No one objected when Lucas suggested they move. They packed up quickly and set off. The narrow trail was slick with morning dew, their footsteps unnervingly loud in the silence. The forest remained eerily quiet. No birds, no insects. Marcus led the way, occasionally glancing at the map. Lucas stayed at the back, keeping a slight distance to watch their surroundings. The hike took longer than expected. Landmarks on the map didn't match what they saw. The trees seemed denser, the path winding in ways that didn't make sense. Marcus stopped frequently to check their route, but the farther they walked, the more it felt like they were circling the same area. Danielle noticed it first. She halted, eyes scanning their surroundings before turning to Lucas. The small cuts on tree trunks, the markers they had made earlier, they were repeating, even though they had been walking in a single direction. Emily tightened the straps of her backpack. She said nothing, but her expression shifted. Marcus checked the map again. It was useless now. Somewhere along the way, they had gotten lost, though no one knew exactly when. The wind picked up. The trees swayed gently, rustling in the breeze. The silence from the morning had lifted, but the sounds weren't comforting. It felt like something was moving with them, keeping pace just beyond sight, hidden in the spaces between the trunks. Lucas stopped and turned to look at the path behind them. Their footprints were clear in the damp soil, but there were others, mismatched in size. They didn't follow any logical pattern, appearing sporadically among the deeper imprints in the mud. He didn't say anything, just stared for a moment before moving on. They walked faster now. No one wanted to stop. The map didn't matter anymore. Any direction would do, as long as it led them out. But the farther they went, the more the trees looked the same. The path blurred, losing shape. The space around them felt smaller, closing in. No one spoke, but they all understood. Wherever they were now, it wasn't where they thought. The sun no longer illuminated the path clearly. The dense canopy allowed only faint streaks of light to filter through. The wind picked up, but it didn't bring cool relief. The air felt heavy, as if the forest itself had changed. Marcus led the way, his steps quicker, more urgent. Emily clutched her backpack straps, her breathing uneven. Danielle kept glancing behind them, but no one spoke. Lucas maintained his position at the rear, his gaze sweeping across the trees, the gaps between the undergrowth. The path ahead stretched endlessly. The trees repeated themselves, as if they were trapped in an invisible loop. Then Marcus stopped abruptly. Right in the middle of the trail, something sat where it shouldn't be. An old backpack, dark-colored, coated in dirt and dust. It didn't belong to any of them. Emily took a step back, eyes locked on it. Danielle slowly turned to Lucas, but he said nothing. Marcus knelt down, his fingers hesitating before unzipping the main compartment. No one stopped him, but no one wanted to see what was inside. One by one, the contents emerged from beneath layers of grime. A worn leather notebook, its cover frayed. A rusted dagger, its blade dull with time. A small flashlight, long since dead. And an old photograph, its edges curled and brittle. The faces in the picture were familiar. Marcus froze. Emily covered her mouth. Danielle turned away. Lucas was the only one who reached for the photo. He flipped it over, his finger tracing a faint line of handwritten text, the ink smudged with age. The date was unclear, but the names on the back were unmistakable. Their own. No one spoke. Their names lay still on the photograph between Lucas's fingers. The wind howled stronger, carrying the restless rustling of leaves colliding against each other. Marcus took a deep breath, snatched the photo from Lucas's hand, and threw it to the ground. Emily took a step back, her eyes never leaving it. Danielle crouched down, brushing her fingers against the edge of the paper. Yellowed stains covered most of it, but the handwriting remained clear. It wasn't written by any of them. Marcus turned away, striding forward without a word. Emily followed, but not too closely. Danielle lingered a moment longer before moving. Lucas was the last to leave. They walked faster now. The path remained the same, thick canopies above, twisted roots rising from the ground. But it no longer felt familiar. No one looked back. No one checked if the backpack was still there. No one glanced at the photo abandoned in the dirt. The deeper they went, the heavier the air became. Shadows stretched unnaturally, not cast by the sun. Something shifted among the treetops, but none of them dared to look up. Marcus quickened his pace. Emily tightened her grip on her backpack. Danielle clutched her arm. Lucas, at the back, kept his eyes locked on the space behind them. Then the path ended. A massive fallen tree lay across their way, its surface blanketed in thick moss. There was no way forward. Marcus squinted. Emily stepped back. Danielle glanced at Lucas. Behind them, the rustling grew louder. Marcus placed a hand on the fallen tree, a chill running down his spine. Emily stepped back, her gaze scanning the darkness behind them. Danielle took a deep breath, gripping her backpack tightly. Lucas remained still, his head tilted slightly as if listening to something. The wind stopped. The leaves no longer rustled. The silence was so absolute that the ragged breaths of the group were the only sounds. A creeping chill ran through them as heavy footsteps echoed from somewhere, each one growing closer. Marcus climbed over the tree first, the others following quickly. Emily's foot caught on a root, but Danielle yanked her upright. Lucas was the last to cross. No one hesitated. A faint light flickered ahead. They ran toward it, never looking back. Behind them, the darkness shrank in on itself, swallowing the path they had taken. When they finally emerged from the forest, no one spoke. Marcus glanced around as the wind returned. Emily wiped sweat from her forehead. Danielle loosened her grip. Lucas remained motionless, his gaze fixed behind them. The backpack from earlier was still lying on the ground.